Okay, so this is where we were last time. We were going to have a set function and a read function and a print function in the date class. And we finished the set function and we finished the print function and we tested them and it worked. So now we just need to write the read function. That's our next task. So let me uncomment this. And I'll go up here. By the way, I think I've mentioned this before, but when you submit your assignments, I ask you to put 6 blank lines between function definitions, just because that makes things a lot easier to read and grade. I don't do that during lecture usually, just because there's so little showing on the screen and having to scroll up and down a lot isn't great. But I just want you to know that I still am looking for that on the assignments. Okay, here's read. So basically for read, I just need to say, let's do it like this. You actually wrote a function that read in a date in this format for assignment 1. I'm recollecting now. There are different ways to do it, but here's how we're going to do it today. Okay, that's basically all there is to it. Anybody want to ask a question about what's going on there, about why that's going to work, why you think maybe it's not going to work? What is happening? Okay. So CN month is just reading something from the keyboard and putting it into this variable month, right? And it turns out that this variable month, when we use a data member in a member function, it refers to that data member of the calling object. So this is saying, read something from the keyboard, put it into the month data member of the calling object, whatever the calling object was. So down here in main, we look date2.read. Date2 is the calling object. So this line is saying, whatever the user enters, put that into the month data member of date2 back there in main. How's that? Okay, so the question is, why do we have to initialize all the private member variables in the set function? The answer to that is we don't have to. This is just a member function that's being provided by the class in case the client program wants to assign a value to a date, right? So in this particular main function, I set date 1 to April 27, 1947. This line here actually is extraneous in the sense that we're never actually using it. We're never actually like printing that date, right? We're setting it and then we're never using it. I only put that line in there to demonstrate what happened, that we can, the date 1 isn't always the calling object when we call set, right? So I'm going to go ahead and take that out. I don't know, did that answer your question, Ben? Okay, all right. Let me tackle the question. How does it know if it's a month, day, or year? Well, because of how the user entered it, right? The user's entering first the month, then a slash, and then a day, and then a slash, and then a year. So whatever the first number is that the user enters, that's the month, and I'm putting it into the data member month. I'm not sure if that will answer your question or not. Feel free to pester me on that. The next question was, can you show where you call read again? Right here. Okay, so here's a date. Let's trace date 2, okay? Date 2 is an object. It's a date object. I declared it here. Not doing anything with it at all until I get to right here where it says date2.read. So at this point in the program, date 2 just has junk in it, right? Date 2 is a date object. It's got 3 data members, month, day, and year. Right now, they are all junk. So when I call read, that means come up here. First thing I see is CN month. That means read something from the input stream that the user typed. Whatever the first thing I read is, that's going to go into the month data member of the calling object, which was date 2. And then I am ignoring the next character, which would be a slash if the user is entering the date correctly. And then I read the next thing after the slash, and that's going to go into the day data member of date 2. I have a question here. Is the user's enter getting ignored in the read function? No, it's not. After I call read here, there will still be a new line character sitting in the input stream. Okay, that's not really the focus of what we're talking about now. So if that's confusing, you don't need to necessarily focus on that. But in case that helps, that's what's going on here. Because in the read function, the last thing I do is I use the extraction operator to read the year. After the year, the user had hit the enter button, which put a new line in the input stream, and that never gets read. And that's fine. We're used to dealing with that in C++. It's not unusual for there to be a new line character sitting there in the input stream. Anything else you want to talk about? This is great that we're just kind of going over this again, making sure that it's all clear. Let's just go ahead and run this just so you can see it. I don't want to do that. I think I need to. Date 1 should be 4/27/1947. Everyone okay so far with where this output is coming from? I'm setting date 1 to 4/27/1947, and then I am printing date 1 should be 4/27/1947, and then I'm calling date 1.print. So that's creating this 4/27/1947 over here. Now it's saying enter a date. So I'm going to enter 1/29/1976. the date you entered was, and then date2.print prints the 1/29/1976. Any other questions about what's going on here? Private function can only be used within another public member function, just as with the private member variables. That is true, except for the word public. So a private function can only be used within another member function, either public or private. Yes, okay, so there's the read function. How does ignore know to ignore a slash? It doesn't, it just ignores one character. So if the user wanted to enter question marks to separate the month and the day and the year instead of a slash, that would still work fine. So if we wanted to enforce that the user entered slashes in their date, this would take a lot more work, right? The character that is being ignored is the last one from the user, which is the enter key, right? Let's take a look at that. So the user's entering, for example, let's say the user enters, like I did, 1/29/1976. Okay, so we say CN month. That reads the 1, so that now date2.month, the month data member of date2 is now going to be equal to 1. Then I say cn.ignore. That's going to ignore whatever the next character here is. In this case, slash. Then I say cn day. So that's going to read the number 29 and put it into the day data member of date2. Then I'm going to call cn ignore again. That's going to ignore this second slash. Then I'm going to say cn year. That's going to read this number 1976 into the year data member of date2. And then I'm done. So what's still left in the input stream is the new line character. And Joseph, when you said enter key, I think you were referring to the new line character. Does that answer your question? So basically, I guess the short answer to your question is no. Does it make sense? Okay. Does it make sense what's happening there now? Okay. Let me know if there's anything else I can do to make it make more sense. I mean, just for fun, we could, okay, the question is, does CN stop reading after the numbers end because it can only read an integer in these situations? Yes, that's correct. The way that the extraction operator works, so I'm gonna fix your question just slightly. It should be, does the extraction operator stop reading? Because CN doesn't do anything, it's an object, right? So the extraction operator stops reading when it gets to a character that can't be part of an integer. So when I say, back up here, if the user entered 12/29/ okay. When I say CN month, the way the extraction operator works when reading integers, and this is section lesson 2.9, if you want to go back and take a look. But the way that the extraction operator works when reading integers is it reads everything it can until it gets to a character that can't be part of an integer. So in this case, it's going to read the 1 and the 2 and then stop. Okay. And you have to separate the ints and slashes with new lines. Okay, so Trent, they do not have to separate the ints and slashes with new lines. In fact, that would cause the program not to work if they separated the ints and slashes with new lines. Okay. And then, can you have see and ignore a specific character? No, you cannot have see and ignore a specific character. You can have it ignore everything up until it gets to a particular character, but that's not the same thing. Yes, okay, let's talk about scope resolution operator. Actually, okay, I was gonna do something for find down here, but let's not do that. Maybe we'll come back to it. Okay, so the scope resolution operator, remember we were talking about scope and I said so far up to this point, you've seen global scope and local scope, right? Global scope, I have said avoid it for variables, but we use it for constants and for functions, right? Our prototypes are all global, which means that those identifiers, so constant names and function names, can be used any place in the file. So that's a global scope. All of our variables so far have been local scope, which means we declare them inside a function and they can only be used inside that function. So that's a local scope. So when we deal with classes, what we're doing here is we are introducing a third kind of scope, which is class scope, a variable that belongs to a particular class or a function that belongs to a particular class. So in my date class, when I declare the set function, I am saying, here's a function named set, but this function is not a global function. It's not a function I can just call by saying set anywhere in the file. This function is a part of the scope of the date class. It's in the scope of the date class. So down here, if I left this off, if I just said void set, that would mean I am defining a global function named set, just like all of those other functions we've been declaring and defining up until this point. That's not what I mean here, though. What I mean here is I want to define a function that is a member of the date class, or in other words, that is in the scope of the date class. So the way I tell the compiler that this is a function that is in the scope of the date class is by using the scope resolution operator like that. Okay. I'm trying to remember how this, I guess in Python, member functions are actually defined right inside the class declaration, right? I can't remember off the top of my head. But, if that's true, anybody remember? In Python, the way you declare a function that's a member of a class is just, you just define it right there inside the class itself. I can't remember, but anyway, if that's the case, then the difference here would be that we're actually defining these functions outside of the class. And just to, maybe this will help you see what's going on here. We could, syntactically speaking, it would be valid for us to actually define these sets up here inside the date class. Then we wouldn't have to worry about this, the scope resolution operator, because it would be clear that the function is in the scope of the date class because it's inside the curly braces for the date class. But the practice in C++ is to declare the function inside the class and then define it outside the class. And the reason for that is because of this strong emphasis on separating the implementation from what the client programmer needs to know. about the class. Or in other words, separating the implementation from the specification of the class. All right, so that if that sentence is still a little fuzzy at this point, that's okay, but within the next 2 or 3 weeks, that's got to be crystal clear. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that's the most important sentence of the semester. Okay, separating the implementation of a class from the specification of the class is the key concept of this semester, I would say. Yes, all the variables in your class should be private. I'm going to just go with that for now. You know, there may be some, in this class, there won't be any exceptions. You know, in real life, you may stumble upon a case where it turns out that you decide you want to make something not private. Very, very rare. So at this point, I would just say, let's go with the rule that they should always be private. And that'll work for us, at least for now. That's correct. That is so that the client programmer can't mess things up, right? The client programmer does not have access to them, so the client programmer can't introduce a bug into your class. But it's even, I would even go a step further than that. Think about it this way. I would like to make it so that I could completely change the implementation of my date class and my client program will still work. That's a great question, Trent. Hold on to that thought. But I want to, the sentence I just said right before was sort of a corollary to the sentence I said was the most important sentence of the semester. So I want to make sure that that's totally clear, right? If I decide, I don't think I want to use a day and a month and a year integer data members for my date class. I think I want to just use one data member that's a string and it says like February 19th, 2017. And so I'm going to change that and that's going to make it so I'm going to have to change the implementations of all of my member functions, but the client programmer doesn't care. Everything is still going to work correctly because I'm not changing anything that's in the public part of the class. Okay. Any questions about that sentence? Okay. All right. So how are structured classes different? That's a great question. There's two ways to answer that. There's the technically C++ syntax answer to that question. And then there's the practical, how do these things actually get used in practice answer to that question. Okay. The technical C++ syntax answer to that question is they are exactly the same thing, except the only difference is that in a class, if you leave off the public and private, the default is private. That doesn't really affect us in practice because when we're using a class, we never leave them off. We always just put everything goes under either public or private. But technically speaking, if I forgot to put the word private or I forgot to put the word public, the default would be private. In a struct, the default is public. That's the only difference syntactically. What would it do to the code if all were set to private? Well, I wouldn't be able to call the set function from main if the set function was private. Okay, so that's the technical difference between a struct and a class. Most of the time, we don't really care about that difference. In terms of practice, a struct, so let me say this first. many C++ programmers would say, you're programming in C++, you just shouldn't use a struct at all. You should just always use a class. Other C++ programmers, and I tend to be in this camp, would say, well, if you're in a situation where you just need sort of a simple way to combine 2 or 3 or 4 pieces of data into one variable, you don't want to do anything fancy with it, you don't want to have member functions, then just use a struct, and that works fine. Okay, so C++ programmers who use structs use it in a situation where they just need something simple, and they don't care about member functions in private and public and all of that. Okay. Yes, you can use structs within classes, and we will see that in the last couple of weeks of the semester. Okay, anything else you want to talk about? This has been great. I appreciate all the questions. I think what we should do at this point is, so what I have planned is I have about 3 more member functions that we're just going to add to this class, just so we can see some more situations that will come up. And then I have a couple other details about classes that that you need to know, and then we will be done at that point talking about classes. So actually, let me just I have a list of things that I want to make sure that I go over. So let me just point out, I can't remember if I already talked about this, but you know, here, a common situation that comes up when you're writing a member function such as set is you might initially call these parameters month, day, and year. And then you've got the problem that if I say month here, does that mean the month data member of the calling object, or does that mean the month parameter? So my preference is to solve that problem by just picking a different name for the parameter. And as a matter of fact, I think it actually turns out that these parameter names are more descriptive than if I just called them month, day, and year, right? They actually specify that these are the month, day, and year that are coming into the function when it's called. So just wanted to point that out. Okay, next thing I want to do is I want to be able to, so we're basically just going to add some functionality to our class now. So someone asked, does the keyword this that is in Java exist in C++? Yes, it does. It means something slightly different in C++ than it does in Java. We won't have any reason to use it for a couple of weeks now. And then, but we'll be talking about it in a couple of weeks, okay? But one more thing I would say about the keyword this is that I often see students using it when they shouldn't be. So I would just put I don't know, just a little bit of a warning. Make sure you're not using it if you don't need to. Okay, so I want to be able to compare 2 dates and see which one comes first. So I'm going to say if I want to be able to do something like this in my client domain. So just a question here. What should my C out statement be at this point? Everyone agree with that? Okay, so I'm going to tell you that, and I apologize in advance. It's a little bit of a trick question, I guess. I don't do it just to humiliate you. I do it because I want to sort of help you try to think carefully in situations like this. That's not quite true. Is it possible that this sentence could be inaccurate if date one, right? If they're both the same, exactly, right? So just to be careful, what I need to say here is simply date one does not come before date two. Okay? So I guess part of my point there is just to say, in my C out statement, what I'm saying is exactly the negation of that logical expression. Okay. All right. So let's write the comes before function. So I'm going to go up to my class declaration, and I'm going to add a comes before function in here. It's going to return a bool. And what was the type of the parameter? You remember, or do I need to scroll back down? It was a date, right? So I'm going to put date other date. How's that? Any questions on that? Okay. So let's write it now. And, no, this is totally minor detail, but normally I would probably try to list my member function definitions in the same order that I listed the prototypes here. But just to make it so I have to scroll up and down less, I'm going to just put the comes before right here at the top. Okay, bool. Someone tell me what the next word is that I need to type after the word bool. Right. Date colon, then the name of the function. And then the parameter. And here we go. Okay. I just want to emphasize this can get a little confusing sometimes. So rather than just kind of put it out there and ask you to follow the pattern, I'm going to actually just at least this one time type out what the pattern is that we are using there. The date, other date, and the private. Are you suggesting that this should be in the private section? Because this is the comes before function is something that we want the client programmer to have access to. We want the client program to be able to call the comes before function. Just other date. Well, other date isn't other date is a parameter of this in this function, right? So other date isn't a member of the class. It's just a parameter to the comes before function. All right. So let me know if that's still not clear. So in our date class right now, we have 7 members, right? We have set, read, print, comes before, day, month, and year. Those are the 7 members of the date class. we're saying that we want set, read, print, and comes before to be public, and we want day, month, and year to be private. Okay. Okay, so comes before. Turns out that there's different ways to do this, but I think probably the easiest, simplest way is going to be to just, let's first compare the years. So clearly, if the year of the calling object comes before the other year, then I'm going to return true here, right? Let me just returns true if the calling object comes before other date. Oops. Does this sentence make sense to everyone? Is it clear what I'm trying to say there? I'm just putting that there to just make sure it's clear in our minds exactly what we're trying to accomplish here. Okay. So what I want to say here is if the year of the calling object comes before the year of the other date, then I want to return true, right? This is pseudocode in case you weren't sure. And I'm going to ask you how to translate that. Okay. Any questions about that? And if not, someone want to tell me what the actual code for this is? Shouldn't return false if they're not true. Yes, so I could say return true. So this is not a complete post condition. You're right. I should say false otherwise. So William, I'm not sure why it would have to be that way. You could, it might be possible to write it that way, although I'm not sure. But I'm choosing to write it this way. Right, so let's go with this approach for now. At least I want to make sure before we move on, everyone understands why this is correct, right? There shouldn't be any argument with the fact that if the calling object year comes before the other date year, then returning true is the right thing to do. Okay. All right. So I think William is cheating a little bit because apparently William knows Java, except if they have the same year. Well, at this point, there's no except if they have the same year. At this point, if the calling object year is less than the other date year, then return true, period. Because if the calling object year is less than the other date year, then they don't have the same year, right? You okay with that? Okay. So let's see, who was it? William's suggestion about how to translate this into C++ code would be correct if we were in Java. But actually, even in Java, it wouldn't be, we could simplify it. So here's the question. How do I say the year? What I want to do here is I want to say the year data member of the calling object. So hold on to that, Joseph. I will get to that in a second. But first of all, let's just translate what I have here into C++. Okay, how do I say the year data member of the calling object? I'm gonna be stubborn and wait for someone to say that, to answer that question. So that's correct. We just say year. When I say year in a member function, that means the year data member of the calling object, right? Okay, and so someone had said something like this dot year. That would be extraneous code, right? There's no reason to put a this there. We can just say year, and that means the year data member of the calling object. Apologies for those of you who have no idea what we're talking about with this. It's okay, you don't need to know that yet. We'll be talking about it in a couple weeks. Okay, but it's, as I said, at this point, it's not necessary. And when we were talking about the word this a few minutes ago, one of the things I said was, one of the problems I see is that students use it when they shouldn't. That would be an example of that, right? In this case, there's no reason to put this in front of it. All right, and then other date, the year data member of other date is just other date dot year, right? So this is the correct translation of what I have there into C++ code. I realize there's a couple of other questions on the table, but before I go there, I just want to make sure everyone's clear on that. Everyone understand what I've got there so far. Any questions? Okay. I realized that there were a couple of questions that people have already sort of answered for themselves, but I just want to take the opportunity to emphasize some common misconceptions, okay? Somebody suggested if I'm going to date 1.year less than date 2.year. I want to make sure everyone sees why that is not correct, right? Because in our particular case, date 1 is the calling object and date 2 was the argument, right? Date 1 was the calling object and date 2 was the argument. But we're writing a comes before function that should work no matter what the calling object is and no matter what the argument is, right? So this is first of all, it won't work because date 1 was a local variable in main, right? So we don't have access to it even. But it's not all, even more importantly, it's not always going to be date 1. It might be a different date sometimes. We want to say whatever the calling object was less than whatever the parameter was. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. Someone suggested return year less than other date dot year. What do you think about that? Would that work? So we have a no and a yes. And the person that actually suggested it isn't voting. There's another no. Okay. All right, so let's take a look. What if calling object is I don't know, my brain is going in slow motion right now for some reason. Let's say the calling object is 5/1/2000, and let's say that other date, other date is um, 5/2/2000. In that case, we would want our function to return true, right? But it's going to return false. Everyone see that? And that you know, I just decided to try to come up with one counter example rather than sort of explain the logic of what's going on here. But basically, this won't work if the years are the same, right? If we didn't have to worry about the possibility that the years were the same, then this would work. Okay. Okay. Good. Glad you guys are thinking hard about this. All right. So the way I'm thinking about this is that, okay, good. I've now taken care of the situation where the year of the calling object is less than the year of the other date. I don't have to worry about that anymore, right? From this point forward in the function, I can assume that that's not the case because I've already taken care of that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to check the opposite, right? If the year is greater than, if the year of the calling object is greater than the year of the other date, then I know I'm going to return false. It's not the case that the calling object comes before the other date. Any questions on that? Okay. Amazing. No questions. Okay, that's good. So the situation I have now is at this point in my function, I know that the years are not equal, right? So what am I going to do next? I'm going to check the months next. Right. And remember, at this point, I know that the years are equal, right? So now if I compare the months and they're not equal, that tells me what to return. Okay, now what? What should I say next? Days are compared, right? So tell me what to type. Right. So let me just do this the wrong way first. This would work. Doing that. And then if none of those are true, that means that it's exactly the same date, right? So I'm just going to return false, because if they're exactly the same, then that means that the calling object did not come before the parameter. So this would be one way to do it. The problem is that this can be simplified. And we can just say, as Joseph suggested, return day is less than public date. Okay, so in other words, I just want to point out, and this is sort of a digression. I'm focusing on something that has nothing to do with the subject of the day, but just an observation here. All of that code that is highlighted right now is exactly equivalent to just return day less than other defective. Okay. This code right here, incidentally, sorry, I'm still on my digression. Bear with me for a minute. This code right here actually is handled in the style conventions. There's a style convention, it might be the very last one, says that you should never have code like this instead, because this is equivalent to just it doesn't quite fit the pattern of the style convention, so never mind that. I retract what I was about to say. I'm just going to go with this. Keep things simple. Okay. All right, any questions about the comes before function? Okay, so let's see if it works. We already have our test code here. Date one is this 4/27/1947. So whatever I enter for date two will determine what gets printed here. So enter a date. So if I enter, let's see, if I enter exactly the same date, you should say date one does not come before date two, right? Okay. And if I, if I was serious about this, I would test it a couple other times. I would say 4/26/1947 does not. I would say 4/28/1947 does come before, and then I'd probably want to test it a couple times when everything was the same except the month, test it when everything is the same except the year, and so on. Okay, any further questions about the comes before function? All right, I think let me see how we're doing here. Okay, well, it turns out that the next function I want to work on is, we may not finish it in 15 minutes, but we're going to get started on it. Okay, so I want to write an increment member function. Okay, so the question was, should all the functions of the class be written above main? That is an interesting question. I'm going to say yes, just as a matter of practice. But what's going to happen here is that at some point, I'm going to say, actually, the client program and the class should not even be in the same file. That doesn't make any sense at all, actually, for the class to be in the same function, in the same file with the client. So this is basically just sort of a toy program that we're doing for now. Eventually, we're going to be dividing this up into separate files. Okay, so we want an increment function. The increment function is going to basically take whatever the day is and advance it to the next day. So let's go ahead and work on that. Notice that just to sort of think about how I could have defined or specified this function, I could have said, let's make it a value returning function that returns the day the next day, right? Returns a date that represents the following day. But I am not doing that. I am writing it so that it actually modifies the calling object. It's going to be a void function that modifies the calling object, does not return a value. So that's just sort of an arbitrary decision that I made. All right, so let's work on defining this. Okay, so anybody have a suggestion about how to write this? let me, right. So there we go, done, right? What if the day is 32 or even 99? Right. So let me say this. What we have now will work, what, 97% of the time, right? 29, roughly speaking, 29 times out of 30. But it's not going to work if day is currently the last day of the month, right? So how are we going to fix that? I'm going to say if day is greater than, what should I say here? Day is greater than what? So let me give you a hint. I'm going to use my decomposition skills here. Okay. Instead of trying to figure out exactly what should be typed here, because it's complicated, right? I'm going to write the concept of what should go here, and I'm going to make that a function. So what's the concept of what should go here? If day is greater than, so I just incremented day. If day is now greater than, right, if day is greater than the number of days in the month of the calling object, right? So this is a sort of a interesting point here. What I'm doing here is I'm calling this function num days in month with the same calling object that I'm currently working on, right? So this function increment is working on a particular calling object, let's say date 2, for example. So if I call this function, it's another member function without anything in front of it, that just means the num, call the num days in month function using the same calling object that I'm currently working on. So if the number of days in the month of the current calling object, I'm sorry, if day is now greater than the number of days in the month of the current calling object, then I need to fix some stuff, right? So that's what's going to come next. Let me just do this real quick before I answer that question. What do I need to do if if I'm in January and I just bumped day up to 32? Increment the month. Is that it? Set data 1. Okay. So we're not done yet, but let me just, right, what if it's December? Exactly. But let's talk about a name like this. So Joseph, I think you're suggesting that instead of num days and month, we call it day max. I guess I would argue that, to me anyway, this is a lot more clear. Like day max, what does that mean exactly? Does that mean the maximum number of days that a month can ever have, which would be 31? Does that mean the maximum day number in a year if you're starting from 1 and going up to 366? Does that mean the maximum number of hours in a day? I think that this spells it out pretty clearly. That would be my 2 cents. Okay. So we still have a problem, right? We still have to check to see if the month is now greater than 12. If month is greater than 12, we're going to do sort of the same thing we did just up there. We're going to set increment year and set month equal to 1. Okay. So I think that this will work. We're done with the increment function, except that now we have to define this num days in month function, right? So I'm going to start by writing my prototype for num days in month in my class declaration. This is going to be a private function because it's not part of the specification of the class, right? It's not, we're not writing this function because we want the client programmer to be able to call it. We're writing it for as a helper function internal to the class. So it's going to be private. It's going to return an integer. Okay. No argument, no parameters, returns an int. Everyone okay with that? Okay, number of days in month. So maybe what we might have here is a switch statement with 12 different cases, one for every month. I'm going to actually accept leap year. Oh, great, right. We have to figure out how to deal with leap years too, right? Okay, so I've done this a few times. So I'm going to show you what I think is the cleanest way to do this. I'm going to start off with that pesky month of February, and I'm going to just say if is leap year, and this is well, hold on. Okay, normally in a switch statement, I would argue that you should never have this much detail in one of the cases of a switch statement because it can get really messy really fast, right? But because in this particular situation, I decided it's okay because it's the only complicated part. The rest of the switch statement's pretty simple, so I'm going to go ahead and go with that. And then I'm just going to say case 4, case 6, case 9, case 11. In all 4 of those cases, I return 30. And then in every other case, I return. Okay, that's a nice, succinct way of doing this. I don't know, someone might actually argue that maybe this is, even though it's more succinct, it might be harder to read than if I just simply listed out all 12 different months. I don't know. That would be an interesting to put them side by side. I could be convinced, but I'm going with this for now. Yes, which would help, wouldn't it? All right, how does that look now? All good now? And I think we actually wrote an is leap year function, right? What is switch month doing? So the way a switch statement works is it just means here's the selector. If month is equal to the 2, then it's going to execute this code. If month is equal to 4 or 6 or 9 or 11, then it's going to execute this code. If month is equal to anything else, it's going to execute this script. Okay. All right, so I think if I'm fast, I might actually have time to get the is leap year function going here. Probably won't have time to test it. We can do that on Monday. So there's my prototype. Again, very common to have functions with no arguments when they're member functions, because what I'm doing here is I'm operating on the calling object, right? Which sometimes some programmers refer to the calling object as an implicit parameter. It's there, we can work on it even though you can't see it, right? So bool date, oops, date : is leap year. If year modulus 400 equals 0, return true. If year modulus 100 equals 0. So we did this when we were talking about value returning functions in lesson 8. So that's why I'm just kind of plowing ahead here. Okay, so I'm not positive. I did a lot of typing there, right? So my guess is there's probably some syntax errors in there somewhere. But unless I'm mistaken, I think we actually completed the increment function. I suppose I could just take 30 seconds here and give it a whirl one time and see how we did. Oh, no syntax errors. So I want to enter a tricky date like 2/28, 1900, right? 1900 is not a leap year, so that should give me March 1. One day later, date 2 is March 1. So it looks, based on just my one test, I'm going to tentatively say that that we're good. Okay. All right. So at the beginning of class, I mentioned that we may have a shortened class or a optional drop-in class on Monday. I will make an announcement about that at some point in the next few days. We spent longer on stuff today than we have been, or than I was expecting. So I may change my mind on that. We'll see. But I think we accomplished a lot today, so that's good. Any last words before we go? All right, then I will see you on Monday. Have fun in lab. Ooh, I see some chats. Oh, okay.